Hollywood superstar Idris Elba, dressed in a hoodie and jeans to blend in, sat quietly at a corner table. The soft clink of silverware against plates filled the air at Harmony Bistro, a cozy restaurant tucked into the bustling streets of downtown Los Angeles. He had always believed his business was more than profit margins. It was about people. Tonight, he wanted to see it through their eyes. As he sipped his coffee, a muffled sniffle caught his attention. Across the room, Tanya, a young black server with tired eyes, stood near the kitchen door, wiping tears discreetly. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her apron. Nearby, Richard, the white manager with sharp features and an authoritative stride, barked orders, his tone laced with condescension. Something felt off. Beneath the polished surface of the bistro lay whispers of distress, hints of injustice rooted in something deeper. Idris leaned forward, intrigued but troubled. Idris's curiosity deepened as he observed Tanya from afar. She moved mechanically between tables, her once warm smile now strained, her shoulders weighed down by an invisible burden. He noticed how Richard lingered near her station more than others, his posture imposing, his voice low but cutting when he spoke to her. "You're slowing us down again," Idris overheard him say, his tone dripping with thinly veiled disdain. Tanya nodded quickly, avoiding eye contact, her hands trembling as she scribbled an order onto her notepad. The contrast was stark. Richard greeted white servers casually, even jovially, while his interactions with black employees like Tanya carried a cold edge. A young busboy, Malik, hesitated before approaching Tanya for help. Idris caught the fleeting look of fear in his eyes when Richard glanced their way. It wasn't just management style. It was something uglier, systemic. Idris leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He signaled for another cup of coffee, keeping up appearances as a regular customer. But beneath the calm exterior, his instinct screamed that this wasn't isolated tension. It hinted at a pattern. As he watched Tanya navigate the room, dodging both trays and Richard's piercing gaze, Idris resolved to dig deeper. Whatever was happening here ran deeper than one bad manager. It was about power, race, and who got to wield it. Idris's next move was deliberate yet unassuming. He struck up casual conversation with a white server named Emily, who seemed approachable but guarded. "Busy night," he remarked lightly, gesturing to the flurry of activity around them. Emily forced a polite smile, glancing over her shoulder before replying, "Yeah, always is on Fridays." Her voice trailed off as Richard passed nearby, his presence silencing any further chatter. Idris noticed her grip tighten on the tray she held, knuckles whitening momentarily, a fleeting sign of unease that spoke volumes. Later, while waiting at the bar for his check, Idris observed Malik again. The young busboy hesitated mid-step when Richard called out sharply, "Don't just stand there. Clear those tables." Malik flinched, his face reddening as he hurried away. Nearby, Tanya avoided making eye contact altogether, her movements robotic as she refilled water glasses. Something about their body language, the way they shrank under Richard's gaze, felt deliberate, calculated even. A faint sound drew Idris's attention. Muffled laughter from two white servers whispering near the kitchen door. One muttered, "He's always breathing down their necks," nodding subtly toward Tanya and Malik. The other shrugged, dismissively. The pieces began falling into place in Idris's mind. This wasn't random micromanagement. It was targeted. And it wasn't just about performance. It was about race. His jaw tightened imperceptibly as he resolved to uncover more. Whatever this system was, it needed exposing. Idris approached Malik as the young busboy stacked chairs near an empty corner. Keeping his tone casual, he asked, "You been working here long?" Malik glanced up, startled. 5 months, sir." His voice was soft, hesitant. "Tough crowd tonight," Idris said, nodding toward Richard, who barked orders across the room. Malik's eyes flickered nervously in Richard's direction. "Yeah, some nights are tougher than others. Seems like he's harder on certain people," Idris pressed gently. Malik hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "It's not just me. It's Tanya, too. He doesn't talk to the white servers like that. Ever. The words hung heavy between them. Before Malik could say more, Richard's sharp voice cut through the air. Malik, stop slacking and get back to work. Malik flinched, nearly dropping a chair. I gotta go, he stammered, hurrying away. Idris watched him leave, his fists clenched beneath the table. The pattern was undeniable now. Richard wasn't just difficult. He was predatory, weaponizing authority against black employees. Idris's resolve hardened. This wasn't just mismanagement. It was racism masked as discipline. And it ended tonight. Idris spotted Karen, a middle-aged hostess with weary eyes but a steady demeanor, organizing menus by the entrance. She seemed less intimidated than the others, someone who might speak freely if coaxed. You holding up okay? Idris asked, leaning casually against the podium. Karen gave him a tight smile. Just another Friday night. Doesn't seem easy, he said, nodding toward Tanya, who was visibly struggling to keep her composure as Richard hovered nearby. Karen sighed, glancing around before speaking softly. It's not. That man makes it unbearable for some of us. For Tanya, Idris prodded gently. And Malik, she whispered, he picks at them like they're targets. Always nitpicking, never satisfied. Meanwhile, he laughs with the white staff like they're old friends. Why doesn't anyone say something? Her voice dropped further. Because we need this job. And because we know what happens if we do. Before she could elaborate, Richard's voice boomed again. Karen, stop chatting and get back to work. She flinched, grabbing a stack of menus. I shouldn't have said anything, she muttered, walking away quickly. Idris watched her go, his jaw tightening. The fear ran deep, and so did the injustice. It was time to act. Idris found Karen again during a brief lull, pulling her aside near the supply closet where they wouldn't be overheard. His tone was calm but urgent. Karen, I need to know everything. She hesitated, clutching a menu tightly in her hands. Why does it matter? You're just a customer. I'm more than that, he said evenly. But right now, what matters is stopping him. Tell me what he's done. Her eyes searched his face for sincerity before she finally spoke, her voice trembling. It's not just yelling. He docks hours from Tanya and Malik for mistakes no one else gets written up for. Last week, he told Tanya she'd never get promoted because people like her don't fit the image of leadership here. Idris's chest tightened, but he kept his expression steady. Has anyone reported him? No one dares, Karen whispered. He threatens their jobs, or worse. Once, he made Malik clean the entire dining room alone after closing, saying it'd teach him discipline. And you've seen all this? Every day, she admitted, tears welling up. I stay quiet because I have bills to pay. But it eats at me, watching them suffer. Idris placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You won't have to stay quiet much longer. As Karen nodded shakily, Idris felt a surge of resolve. Richard wasn't just abusing power. He was weaponizing fear. And tonight, that weapon will be taken away. Idris stepped into the shadows of the kitchen hallway, his mind racing. The evidence was undeniable. Richard's actions weren't just cruel. They were calculated and racist. He thought of Tanya's trembling hands, Malik's flinches, Karen's quiet despair. This wasn't just their fight. It was his responsibility. He clenched his fists, then exhaled slowly. No more hiding. Pulling off his hoodie, Idris straightened his posture, revealing the confidence of a man who owned the room. His undercover act had served its purpose. Now it was time to step into the light. As he moved back toward the dining area, his jaw set with determination. Richard would answer for this. Not tomorrow, not later. Tonight. Idris approached Tanya as she stood near the hostess stand, her hands gripping a tray so tightly her knuckles turned white. Tanya, he said softly, his voice steady but kind. She looked up, startled. Can I help you, sir? You've been through enough tonight, he replied, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I want you to know you're not alone. Before she could respond, Richard appeared, his sharp features twisting into a scowl. Is there a problem here? He demanded, his tone laced with authority. No problem at all, Idris said calmly, turning to face him. Just having a conversation. This isn't your place to interfere, Richard snapped, stepping closer. Get back to your table or leave. Idris met his gaze evenly. Actually, it is my place. Tanya's eyes darted between them, confusion flickering across her face. Richard scoffed, crossing his arms. You think you can waltz in here and... I don't have to think, Idris interrupted, his voice firm now. I know exactly what's been happening here. And trust me, you won't like what comes next. For the first time, uncertainty flashed in Richard's eyes. But before he could retort, Idris stepped aside, gesturing subtly toward the growing crowd of staff watching silently nearby. The stage was set for justice. The tension in the room was palpable as Idris stepped forward, his presence commanding. Richard glared at him, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. Listen, Richard began, his voice dripping with condescension. I don't know who you think you are. I'll tell you exactly who I am. Idris interrupted, his tone calm but razor-sharp. He turned to face the growing audience of employees and customers now watching intently. My name is Idris Elba. In this restaurant, it belongs to me. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Tanya's tray nearly slipped from her hands, her wide eyes locked on Idris. Even Richard faltered for a moment, his smug demeanor cracking under the weight of realization. Idris continued, addressing everyone in the room. I came here tonight because I wanted to see how things were running, not just the numbers, not just the profits, but how people were being treated. What I've seen has been unacceptable. Richard tried to interject, his voice rising defensively. Sir, if there's an issue, we can discuss it privately. No. Idris cut him off sharply, his voice cutting through the air like steel. This doesn't happen behind closed doors anymore. Everyone deserves to hear the truth. He turned back to Tanya, his expression softening. Tanya, would you mind sharing what you've experienced here? Her voice trembled as she spoke, barely above a whisper. He makes everything harder for us. For me, for Malik, for others. We're always wrong, no matter what we do. He says things, cruel things, about our race, about who we are. Murmurs spread among the staff and patrons, disbelief mingling with anger. Idris nodded solemnly. Go on. He takes hours away, Tanya continued, finding strength in Idris's steady gaze. Last month, he told me I'd never be promoted because customers wouldn't trust someone like me. And when I try to speak up, he threatens my job. The room fell silent, save for the faint clink of silverware in the distance. Idris's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. And you, Malik? Idris asked, turning to the young busboy standing nervously nearby. Malik hesitated, looking at Richard warily before speaking. He calls me lazy when I'm working hardest. Makes me clean everything by myself after closing sometimes. Says I need to earn respect, but he doesn't treat the white servers that way. Karen chimed in next, her voice stronger now. It's not just them, it's all of us. He picks apart every little thing they do, humiliates them in front of customers, and gets away with it because we're scared to lose our jobs. Richard's face flushed red, his earlier arrogance crumbling into desperation. This is ridiculous. These accusations are baseless. Baseless, Idris repeated, his voice rising slightly, silencing Richard instantly. Dozens of witnesses have seen your behavior tonight. Do you really believe anyone will side with you once they hear these stories? Richard stammered, glancing around frantically. I was only doing my job. Your job isn't to terrorize people, Idris shot back, his voice cold and unyielding. Your job is to lead, to support, to create a workplace where everyone feels valued and safe. Instead, you've abused your power to target black employees specifically. That's racism, plain and simple. By now, the entire restaurant had stopped moving. Servers stood frozen mid-step, diners craned their necks to watch, and even the kitchen staff peeked out from behind the swinging doors. All eyes were on Richard, whose authority and dignity was unraveling before them. Idris leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. You made these employees feel powerless, trapped, and afraid. But let me make one thing crystal clear. You work for them, not the other way around. Richard opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. His shoulders slumped, his face pale, as the full weight of his actions sank in. For the first time, he looked small, diminished. Idris straightened, addressing the room once more. Tonight, you've all witnessed something important. You've seen how fear can silence good people. But you've also seen that silence doesn't mean acceptance. Change starts with courage and accountability. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. Then, with deliberate precision, he added, and rest assured, accountability is coming for everyone involved. With that, Idris gestured for Tanya and the others to join him near the center of the dining area. As they gathered close, visibly shaken but emboldened by his support, Richard remained rooted to the spot, humiliated and powerless. The reckoning wasn't over yet, but the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Idris turned back to Richard, who stood frozen, his face a mix of shame and defiance. "Richard," Idris said firmly, his voice cutting through the tense silence, "your time here is done." "What? You can't just—" Richard sputtered, panic creeping into his tone. "I can," Idris interrupted, his gaze unwavering. "You've abused your position, targeted employees based on race, and created a toxic environment. Effective immediately, you're fired." The room erupted in murmurs, disbelief giving way to shock, and then relief. Tanya covered her mouth with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face. Malik let out a shaky breath, while Karen nodded silently, vindication written across her features. Richard took a step forward, desperation flashing in his eyes. "You don't understand. This place will fall apart without me." "No," Idris replied sharply, stepping closer until he was inches away from Richard. "This place has been falling apart because of you. Your behavior doesn't reflect the values of this business or the people who work here. Pack your things and leave." Now, for a moment, Richard looked like he might argue further, but the weight of the crowd's stares silenced him. With one last glare at Idris, he stormed toward the office, muttering under his breath. Once Richard was out of sight, Idris addressed the staff, his tone softening. "To all of you, I'm sorry. I failed to see what was happening here sooner. That ends today." Tanya stepped forward hesitantly. "Thank you for believing us. You shouldn't have had to beg someone to believe you," Idris said gently. "From now on, this restaurant will be a safe space for everyone." Malik spoke up, his voice stronger than before. "What happens next?" "We rebuild," Idris answered. "Together, starting with new leadership that reflects respect and fairness. If anyone wants to share more about their experiences, I'll listen. No retaliation. No fear." Karen wiped away tears, nodding. "We've waited so long for this. And it starts right now," Idris promised. As applause broke out among the staff, the atmosphere shifted from despair to hope. The nightmare was over. A brighter future awaited. Idris gathered the staff in a circle, his expression resolute but compassionate. "Firing Richard is just the first step," he began. "What happened here wasn't just one bad manager. It's a symptom of deeper issues we need to address." Tanya nodded, her voice steadier now. "It's like, even before him, there were rules that didn't feel fair. Like who got promotions or raises." "Exactly," Idris said. "That stops today. We're going to review every policy, scheduling, promotions, discipline, to make sure they're fair and transparent. And I want your input." Malik raised his hand tentatively. "What if someone else tries to act like him?" "We'll create safeguards," Idris replied firmly. "Anonymous reporting systems, regular check-ins, and mandatory training on racial bias. No one should ever feel powerless again." Karen added, "And maybe more black managers? People who understand what it's like." Idris smiled, nodding. "Absolutely. Representation matters. From now on, this restaurant will reflect the diversity and strength of its employees and protect them." The group exchanged hopeful glances, their shoulders lighter than they'd been moments ago. For the first time in years, they felt seen and valued. As the meeting ended, Idris watched them return to work, determination burning in his chest. This wasn't just about fixing a broken system. It was about building something better, something lasting. Later that night, as the restaurant emptied and silence settled over Harmony Bistro, Idris stood alone by the window, gazing out at the city lights. He thought about Tanya's tears, Malik's fear, and Karen's quiet courage. This wasn't just their story. It was a reminder of the responsibility he carried as a leader. Protecting people isn't optional, he murmured to himself. It's the whole job. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Systemic change never was. But tonight proved something vital. When those in power stepped up, real change could happen. Not tomorrow, but today. As he turned off the lights, Idris felt a renewed sense of purpose. Justice had been served, but vigilance remained key. The fight for fairness wasn't over. It never truly was. And he'd lead it, one step at a time. Have you ever been in a situation where you saw someone being abused or mistreated? Share your experience in the comments. If you enjoyed this and want more content on an inspiring Black Story channel like this, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and remember, real courage is not fearing the consequences, but prioritizing justice over comfort.